It's been a couple of weeks since my last IL-2 Korea update, and as we're getting very close to the planned Q2 release window, the developers are starting to share some very important new information and updates that we definitely need to talk about. We're going to take a look at how the new Gunsights are being modeled, how airfields are being turned from empty spaces into much more believable military bases, and how the new clouds could affect not only the look of the sim, but also visibility, spotting and air combat. And all of this will give us a much better idea of how IL-2 Korea is shaping up as a combat flight sim. But the biggest news this time is not just in the devlogs. The developers have also responded in the forums to two of the biggest concerns around IL-2 Korea right now, the AI improvements and the single-player campaign experience. So make sure to stay until the end, because we're going to take a closer look at what they actually confirm, what it means for single player, and whether this starts to answer some of the biggest questions from the community. Welcome back folks, I hope you're all doing well. Let's start with the video. Let's start with the new Gunsight details, because while this might seem like a relatively small feature compared to things like graphics or aircraft systems, it's actually one of the elements we as players spend the most time looking at during a fight. According to the developers, they completely reworked the way Gunsights are being simulated in IL-2 Korea, especially the optical side of things, and what's really interesting is that they recently gained access to a real working ASP3 Gunsight from a real MiG-15. Which allow them to study details that normally will never appear in technical manuals or photographs alone. And honestly, some of the detail they are describing here is kind of insane. They are talking about recreating the exact brightness, color, texture, reflections, imperfections, and even the subtle appearance of the reticle illumination using the original 1950s bulb still installed in the real Gunsight. They also confirm features like brightness adjustment, more precise reticle animations, and even voltage-dependent illumination, which means that if your aircraft suffers electrical damage during combat, the Gunsight itself can become dimmer or harder to read, which is a really cool detail because it turns something visual into an actual gameplay factor. They also mention improvements to the glass itself, so the sights no longer look perfectly transparent or artificial, and visually some of these cockpit screenshots look absolutely fantastic, especially with the way the illuminated reticles interact with cockpit lighting and reflections inside the canopy. Now this is obviously a much smaller topic compared to some of the biggest gameplay discussions we'll get into later in the video, but it's still another very good example of the level of authenticity and attention to detail the team is aiming for with IL-2 Korea. Now this next devlog is probably one of my favorites so far, because it highlights one of the biggest differences between IL-2 Korea and IL-2 Great Battles, and that is the overall feeling of life and activity inside the airfields themselves. The developers actually say they wanted to eliminate that sense of lifelessness, and honestly, looking at these images, I think they absolutely nailed it. And to really understand the scale of the difference here, let me quickly show you a comparison between a typical airfield in IL-2 Great Battles and what we are now seeing in Korea, because the contrast is honestly insane. What used to feel like a relatively empty stretch of terrain with a few static objects here and there now looks like an actual military installation in the middle of a war. Everywhere you look, there's activity and detail. Aircraft undergoing repairs, engines being removed, wings detached, damaged aircraft being used for spare parts, fuel trucks, ammunition, technical areas, storage zones. It genuinely feels like there's an entire military operation functioning around you instead of just a spawn point for your aircraft. And one thing that I really like is that none of this seems random. The developers explain that what might look like visual chaos at first actually follows real military logic, where different areas of the airfield serve different purposes. You have technical maintenance zones, fuel and lubricant storage areas, repair sections, staging zones for spare parts, security camps, and all these different layers working together to create the atmosphere of a real wartime airbase. So it is pretty far from just being a random prop placement across the terrain. In my honest opinion, this kind of detail does a lot more than just improving visuals. The devs themselves mentioned that seeing aircraft under repair or under maintenance subconsciously changes how you perceive combat damage once you're up in the air, because you start feeling that every damaged aircraft actually matters, and I definitely agree with them. And reading that part of the devlog honestly makes me wonder if some of this could eventually connect with the Commander career mode as well. This is just speculation on my part, but imagine returning from a difficult mission and later seeing more damaged aircraft or repair activity around your own squadron airfield depending on what happened during the campaign. If they ever go in that direction, the immersion potential here will be absolutely incredible. Now, I am sure most of you will agree with me that the improvements we are seeing in these images is just massive. The amount of attention to detail, the way objects blend into the terrain, and the overall density of the airfields makes these locations really feel far more believable than anything we have previously seen in the IL-2 series. I can't wait to start a mission in one of these airfields and see all of these improvements by myself. Now, before we move into the biggest news of the video, we also got a new devlog focused entirely on clouds and sky rendering. I want you to take a moment and appreciate the next image. These are the beautiful clouds we currently have in IL-2 Great Battles, and these are the clouds we are about to get in IL-2 Korea. The amount of variation in cloud shapes, density, lighting, and atmosphere is on a completely different level, with skies that feel dramatically more layered and natural than before. Some of the screenshots generally look like photorealistic to the point where without context you could almost mistake them for real aerial imagery. But what I really like about this devlog is that the developers are not treating clouds as simple visual decoration. They directly describe the sky as the true battlefield of aerial combat, emphasizing how important clouds are from a tactical perspective, especially during the Korean War, where radar technology was still limited and pilots relied heavily on visual detection. The developers specifically mentioned target detection against cloud backgrounds and inside cloud layers as one of the major technical challenges they have been working on, because unlike civilian flight sims, combat simulators need to balance beautiful volumetric clouds with the ability to actually spot enemy aircraft during combat, something that becomes even more critical for VR players where visibility and contrast already play a huge role in situational awareness. And apparently, thanks to major improvements to the graphics engine, they now have enough rendering detail and lighting quality to take the visuals much farther without completely destroying spotting visibility, which is honestly huge news for combat flight sim players. The lighting itself also looks incredible because clouds are now affected not only by atmospheric lighting but also by terrain reflections, seasons, environmental conditions, creating skies that feel dramatically more believable and varied depending on the time of day and the environment below you. And there's one little detail that caught my attention, and it is when the devs mention how using cloud cover wisely can completely change the outcome of the battle against a superior opponent. Because reading this immediately makes me wonder whether clouds could potentially play a much larger role in AI visibility and combat behavior as well, which could be a massive improvement for the single player experience if that ends up being the case. And speaking of combat visibility and tactical behavior, this is where we get into what is probably the biggest topic surrounding IL-2 Korea right now, because over the past few weeks a lot of discussion has been happening in the Steam forums regarding AI behavior, campaign depth, and the overall single player experience. Now, as we all know, in combat flight sims, no matter how good the graphics look, if the AI and campaign systems don't evolve, a lot of players are going to feel disappointed, especially considering how much potential the Korea setting has. Now, what's interesting is that the developers actually responded directly to many of these concerns, and some of the things they are mentioning are honestly very promising. According to the devs, IL-2 Korea is planned to feature a completely new AI combat module designed specifically for the Korean War environment. They mention improvements to target prioritization and target distribution between AI aircraft, which honestly could be a massive change if it works well, because one of the classic problems in combat flight sims is seeing multiple AI units behaving unrealistically and all focusing on the exact same target at the same time. If AI flights start distributing targets more intelligently, combat could instantly feel far more believable and dynamic. Another really interesting point is the mention of more situation-specific combat logic, because depending on what they actually mean by situation-specific combat logic, this could potentially become one of the biggest AI improvements in the entire sim. It might mean AI reacting differently depending on damage state, altitude, field condition, tactical disadvantage, or overall combat situation instead of always behaving in the same predictable way, which again could dramatically improve how believable air combat feels moment to moment. They also mention improved wingman information sharing, more advanced formation behavior, and even new radio communication systems using speech synthesis technology, which honestly opens up a lot of interesting possibilities depending on how far they decide to take it. Whether that simply means more dynamic radio calls or something significantly more advanced, we still don't know, but it definitely sounds far more ambitious than the relatively basic communication systems we've had in the IL-2 series. And honestly, some of these details could end up being a much bigger deal than they might initially sound, because one of the long-standing issues in combat flight sims that we all agree on has always been the gap between believable aircraft flight models and believable pilot behavior. Now, the second major topic discussed in the forums was the campaign structure itself, because a lot of players have been wondering how dynamic and persistent the overall war environment is actually going to feel once the game releases. And based on the developer responses, it seems pretty clear that their main goal is to create a more historically driven campaign experience where the progression of the war follows the real timeline of the conflict instead of becoming completely detached from historical events. But at the same time, they also confirm something that I think is extremely important for immersion, which is persistent damage and repairs within the campaign environment. And listen to this, according to the devs, destroyed objects and damaged infrastructure will not instantly reset after every mission, and repairs can take some time depending on the type of target, which means the battlefield itself can gradually reflect the consequences of previous operations over time. And honestly, combined with everything we saw earlier regarding airfield activity, damaged aircraft, maintenance areas and military logistics, this starts to paint a much bigger picture of what the Commander career experience might eventually feel like in IL-2 Korea. Now obviously, we still need to see how all of this actually works in practice once players finally get their hands on the sim, but I have to admit that reading these developer responses generally made me feel more optimistic about the long-term single-player experience than I was a few weeks ago. And for those of you who are really passionate about dynamic campaigns, don't worry just yet, because the developers also mentioned they may explore more dynamic campaign features in the future, so while Korea is clearly taking a more historical approach, at least for now, the door definitely doesn't seem completely closed on deeper dynamic systems later in the future. So overall, I think these new devlogs and developer responses painted a much clearer picture of what IL-2 Korea is actually trying to become. The new Gunsight systems looks incredibly detailed, the airfields finally feel alive and believable, the new clouds look absolutely stunning while also playing a much bigger tactical role in combat, and most importantly, the AI improvements being discussed sound far more ambitious than what many people probably expected a few months ago. And to be honest with you guys, I think a lot of people are expecting IL-2 Korea to be and to feel exactly the same as IL-2 Great Battles, but with just a new map and new aircraft. And I truly believe they couldn't be more wrong about that. When you combine all of this with the persistent damage system, repairs, military logistics and the atmosphere they are building around the airfields and campaign environment, I generally believe the Commander Career Mode has the potential to become one of the most immersive single-player experiences we have seen in combat flight simulators in a very long time. Alright folks, that's gonna be all for now. Subscribe and stay tuned for more IL-2 Korea updates. Thanks for watching, I'm Brigadier Fox, and see you in the skies.